Gentlemen. Good morning, gentlemen. I don't know, I met most of you. My name is Rabbi Katz. Hopefully you'll have an amazing stay here. I'm just going to do a quick introduction. Generally, we're going to be doing some Talmud study, but we'll start that tomorrow. But just to kick it off, today we'll have two amazing teachers. We'll start off with Rabbi Hill Eisenberg. Rabbi Hill Eisenberg is a graduate student at BMG. He's studying at BMG, which is the large yeshiva, which we'll visit. About 9,000 students that are studying there. He's been there for many years. But most recently, he actually taught at Princeton University, students there. He recently published a book, publishing his second book. And he's lectured literally across the country on various Torah and Judaism related topics. So I think you'll find it very inspiring. Ask him a lot of questions when appropriate. And maybe we'll have him back if we don't finish. But I think he has a tremendous amount to offer. I think you guys will enjoy it.
Okay, nice to meet you guys. Like Rabbi Katz mentioned, my name is Hillel Eisenberg. I'm originally from a small little town called Rochester, New York, which is all the way up north near Canada. And in addition to occasionally giving classes here, I learn in Beis Medrash Gavaya, which you guys are going to check out, the largest yeshiva outside of Israel, the second largest yeshiva in the world. Additionally, I am privileged to be able to give talks and speeches all over the country and world. And as well, I give classes in Princeton, like Rabbi Katz said. I teach nuclear physics. I'm joking. I do not teach nuclear physics. I teach the fundamentals of Judaism, which, by the way, is far more complicated and far more nuanced and sophisticated than nuclear physics. And before I begin, I speak fast, so feel free to slow me down or ask questions. I'm going to spit out a lot of information to you, a lot of statistics, a lot of potentially provocative statements. If anyone has a question, you could interject, no problem. We can also leave some for the end. Hopefully we'll have time. I want to share with you an idea, a perspective, which will essentially answer the million-dollar question, which is, why should I dedicate even 1 inch of mental real estate for Judaism? Why should I care? We flew all this way to Lakewood, New Jersey, obviously to have the time, but also to explore authentic Torah Judaism. Why should I dedicate even 1 ounce of emotional energy on this ancient, prehistoric, dinosauric religion, ethnicity, culture, whatever you want to call it? I want to offer you a perspective that I think can radically change the way you view the Jewish people, you view the Torah, you view mitzvos. I want to offer you a perspective that I think could give you a rock-solid answer that you can be able to tell yourself, why in the world should I care about being Jewish? Am I Jewish just because my grandmother will disown me if I abandon the faith? Am I Jewish just because it would be super awkward if I wasn't Jewish? Or is there something more? Am I emotionally committed for some reason or another? I want to give you a perspective that I think could answer that question. And I want to begin with the following. Since the beginning of time, if I were to ask you, how many religions have cropped up since the beginning of time in your head? How many can you think of? So many people, 5, 10, if you know history really well, you could think of 15 different religions, maybe 20. So historians give the number of religions from the beginning of time until now as being between 1,500 and 6,000 religions from the beginning of time until now. 6,000, not including sub-religions and sub-ethnicities. And out of all those close to 6,000 religions, do you know how many have been around continuously, unbroken, for close to 3,700 years? That is correct. There is only one, and that is Judaism. Judaism has been around far longer than any other religion or ethnicity, far longer than the Han's Chinese, far longer than the Eastern Mongolians, far longer than the Western Mongolians, far longer than the Incas and the Aztecs and the Mayans, far longer than the African tribe. The Jewish people have been around continuously longer than any other religion on earth. My question is, why? How? What is the secret to our longevity? What is the secret to our immortality? And this is despite the fact that the Jewish people suffer more than any other people on earth. In the last 150 years alone, just the last 150 years, there have been more Jews who have been murdered because of their religion than almost any other religion in the world combined. In the last 150 years, there have been more Jews in the world killed because of their religion than almost every other religion in the world combined. How do you explain our tenacity, our longevity? They say a funny story. There was an evil king who ruled a bunch of Jews, thousands and thousands of Jews when he was in his kingdom. And he decided one day to have new laws, two terrible, horrible, evil laws regarding the Jews in his kingdom. And he got all the Jews in his kingdom into a town square, and he starts rattling off and reading all these new, evil, horrible decrees. And, there's women who are fainting, and there's people crying, and they're sobbing. But there's this one old man in the back who just cannot stop laughing hysterically. So at first, the king just ignores the guy. But eventually, the king says, okay, dude in the back, what's up with the laughing? So this old man looks at the king, and he says, you really think you're the first person to have started up with the Jews? You really think so? Well, you're not. There was a guy, his name was Pyro. You know what he wanted to do to us? He wanted to annihilate all of us. You know where he is? He's gone. You know what we did to him? We turned him into matzah. There was a guy, his name was Haman. You know what he wanted to do to us? He wanted to kill every man, woman, and child. You know where he is? He's gone. You know what we did to him? We turned him into Hamantashen. There was a guy, his name was Antiochus. You know what he wanted to do to us? Wipe us off the face of the earth. You know where he is? He's gone. You know what we did to him? We turned him into latkes. So this old man turns to the king and says, I cannot help myself but think. Listening to you here, say your new evil, horrible decrees. That when you are gone and we're still here, what food will we one day turn you into? It's just a joke. But my question is, what gives us such confidence? What makes us so sure? So, I like to begin with a story. What I'm going to say are built on top of one another. Okay, so just hear me out. So recently a couple years ago, I was in Cincinnati. There's a city in America called Cincinnati, home to the Bengals, if you follow football. And I was there with a group of friends. We were walking in downtown Cincinnati, and there was this Christian preacher who's sitting on a box, or standing on a box, and he's preaching the gospel to the street in Cincinnati, busy downtown. And he sees a group of Jews, and he licks his lips, and he's all excited. He calls us over. Jews, get over here. So we approach him, and people see that there's, a Christian preacher, and there's a bunch of Jews. It's like, a spiritual boxing match. So there's a whole crowd that forms. And this preacher turns to us and says, Jews, you know you're wrong. Why do you even bother? So I said, we're not. He said, oh yeah? What does the word Elokai mean? I said, God, or my God? He said, what does the word Elohim mean? I said, also God? He said, wrong. It's multiple gods. Because there are many, plural. There's God, and then there's the Son Jesus. And the whole crowd goes, oh, ah. So I turned to him and I said, do you have any idea what you're talking about? Are you claiming to know Hebrew? What does the word Bereshis mean? What does the word Shema mean? What does the word what does that mean? You have no idea what you're talking about. And the crowd goes, ooh, ah. So this guy orients himself, and he throws a Hail Mary at me. He says, okay, I see how this is going to go. If you claim that you guys are the chosen people, why do so many bad things happen to you guys? So I turn to him, I say, gather around, folks. I got breaking news for you. We are not the chosen people. The crowd. What? There's a guy in the back, Larry, get over here. He just said the Jews are not the Jews. You're going to want to hear this guy. Call him. I said 4,000 years ago, in a world run amok of immorality, in a world rampant with murder and rape and theft and intellectual fluff, there was one man who was choosing light. There was one man who chose love and harmony. There was one man who chose God. And therefore, God chose him. And that man was my great-grandfather Abraham. And sure, there have been many times throughout history where Jews forgot to choose God. But in a world that is forever choosing money and power and lust and prestige, we forever choose God, and therefore he chooses us. You see, Abraham got a knock on his tent. And he opens it up, and it's God. Hello, my name is God. Nice to meet you. I want to make a deal with you. I see that you're choosing me. I see you're choosing love and harmony and ethical moral behavior. I want to make a deal with you. You promise me that you and your kids and great-grandkids will forever choose light and choose harmony and choose me. I will choose you. I will make you unconquerable. I will make you indestructible. That's our deal. You choose me, I choose you. And that deal has been the story of the Jewish people for the duration of our history. We choose God, he chooses us. We don't choose God, he doesn't choose us. We're sitting in Egypt for 210 years. We're whipped. We're tortured by the Egyptians. Eventually, we were freed. Jewish history should have been over with before it even began in Egypt. And yet it wasn't. You want to know why? Because we didn't stop choosing God, despite the fact that the most pervasive culture in antiquity, maybe of all time, the Egyptian culture, was subsuming every other culture it came in contact with. Do you know how many other ancient cultures there were? Way back in the time of the Egyptians? Like none. Why? Because everyone became Egyptian, because they were just so pervasive. You know who didn't? The Jewish people. Why? Because that's our secret. We choose God, he chooses us. We come out of Egypt, right? God splits the sea. You know what happens the first second we walk into the desert? You know what happens? We're attacked by a barbaric tribe called Amalek. We don't have any experience in warfare. We don't have any land that they're stealing, but they're attacking us. Okay? Jewish history at that point probably should have been over with. But it wasn't. You want to know why? Because we didn't stop choosing God. Because instead of forming some sort of tactical war force, we prayed and we committed ourselves to even more ethical behavior and more morality. And you know what happened? We were saved. And that's our trick throughout history. We choose God, he chooses us. Our temple was destroyed. We're raped. We're murdered. We're dispersed all over the world. We should have been done with. Like every other religion was done with. Yet we weren't because we didn't stop choosing God. Throughout history, this is our secret. I'll go through it. Romans destroy the second temple. After the Romans, by the way, destroyed the second temple, in 135 CE, another Roman massacre took place, leaving 580,000 Jews dead. 580,000 Jews dead in the city of Beitar. Spaniards, Spanish Inquisition, wiping out every last Jew they could find, and yet we're still here. Khmelnytsky in 1648, Bohemia in 1744, Austria in 1843, 1915, the Russian army killed 120,000 Jews. In 1917, Ukrainian peasants killed another 200,000 Jews. 1918, 1919, 120,000 Jews were killed, and close to 500 pogroms. In a year and a half, there were 500 pogroms. This is not 9,000 years ago. This is 100 years ago. Obviously, the Holocaust doesn't need, The secret is that people, Jews all over, got up, picked themselves up, dusted themselves off, and committed themselves to keep choosing God. Okay? This leads me to my next question. Very nice. Our secret formula, the Jewish people have been around because we choose God, therefore he miraculously chooses us. We're indestructible. But here's my question. Why, in fact, do we keep choosing him? If it leads to so much bloodshed and so much torture, why do we keep choosing him? Pretty good question. Every other religion, when it was faced with another culture that was better than theirs, when it was with their backs against the wall, being offered a lifestyle that was more convenient and more pleasurable, you know what they did? They're like, the heck with our religion, let's join your religion. That's what happened to every other religion on earth, except the Jews. Why not? Why do we keep choosing this religion, which continuously gets us into hot water and killed and raped? Why? What is the secret? Why do the Jewish people hold on and choose continuously their religion when every other religion has no problem just being subsumed by another ethnicity and culture which is better than theirs? That's my question. To compound the question, we're clutching close to a Torah, to a religion that is, without a question, the single most restrictive religion on earth. You hear this? The Torah has how many mitzvahs? 613, right? We know the famous number. 613 mitzvahs, 613 commandments, which, by the way, those are not 613 commandments. Those are 613 categories of commandments. Each one has a million different sub-mitzvahs and sub-commandments. It is the single most detailed-oriented religion on earth. Nothing even comes close. You cannot find me a single... I just spent a long time in Thailand, all over Thailand, and exploring all different types of... researching and looking and seeing all different types of... Nothing is nearly as close as every single morning. When you wake up in the morning, the Torah comes screeching to a halt in front of your bed and takes out a megaphone and starts screaming, you got to do this, you can't do that, you got to do this, how to what to wear, when to wear, and how to wear, so when to pray, and what to pray, what to eat, how to eat. Chill out. Whoa. Everybody settle down. This is the religion that has lasted this long? The most restrictive religion has lasted the longest in world history. How does that? Isn't that so counterintuitive? The most restrictive religion is the one that has lasted the longest, far longer than ones that are like no restrictions whatsoever. You know, it's like certain forms of Christianity and even watered down Islam and Buddhism. There's no restrictions. You can do anything. And yet, Judaism, which has the most restrictions, is alive and kicking for longer than anyone else? Doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
You said watered down Islam. What do you mean by that?
There's extreme Islam,
Yeah.
separate category. Then there's Islam, which is religious in nature, which there are restrictions, not nearly as many as the Jewish people. And then there's the regular Muslim people who might live in Detroit, or might live in Melbourne, or might live all over, who they take some things, they don't take other things, whatever.
So saying the amount of religious following Muslims is not comparable to like the Jewish religion following?
No. There's way more obviously religious Muslims than there are Jewish, but there's, is it percentage wise? I don't know. There's 1.83 billion Muslims. Yeah. There's only 14 million Jews. But the percentage, but my point is that even religious Muslims, it's watered down from even what it was 800 years ago. Yes. You know what I mean?
The continuation of Judaism is a lot more powerful than the change.
Right. So the question, it's a very simple question that I'm asking. We are here because we choose God, He chooses us. Okay, my question is, why do we in fact choose? Does the question that I'm asking make any sense? Makes sense. I think it's a pretty good question. Just to compound the question, I was saying, why do we choose God if it leads us to so much bloodshed? And on the top of that, it's the most restrictive form of life on earth, right? That's the question. Here's the misconception. Here's where we go wrong. Okay? In my opinion, the single greatest religious misconception on earth is that we are somehow doing stuff for God. We are somehow sacrificing for God. We're serving God. We're praying for God. We offer sacrifices to God as if He's some sort of guy sitting there eating barbecues and like collecting prayers and He needs all this stuff. Complete, utter misconception. God does not need anything. He is perfect. He gave the Jewish people the Torah, which is one thing. A road book, a roadmap, a treasure chest for the single best life on earth. Here is a book where if you follow it, it will lead you to the greatest life on this earth. Not next world, not kingdom come, not 70 virgins in the next world. I think they bumped it up to 71 virgins with inflation. 72 virgins with inflation. Do you know how many times it says in the entire Torah anything about the next world? Can anyone guess? How many times does it say an outright, blatant reference to the next world, to kingdom come, to 71 virgins in the next world? You know how many times? 0 times, because that's not the point. Yeah.
What's the afterlife then? Isn't that the next world?
There is. I'm not saying there's not. But that's not what the Torah's focus is at the time of giving, and our focus is not that.
Isn't that like when you commit a mitzvah or you give, then that translates into the afterlife?
It does. I'm not taking that away.
So isn't that the next world?
It is. It definitely exists. But it's not highlighted at all. Why? Because first and foremost, the Torah is a book to make our lives the best in this world. Okay, here's a question for you all. Every single one of the 613 commandments is here to make your life better in this world. I challenge anybody to think of even one that is restricting my life in this world for just some no apparent reason, inexplicable. I can't understand it. It's this religious, dinosauric, archaic, dumb, outdated rule and law, which is not enhancing the quality of my life. I am here to contend that every single one of the 613 commandments is here to make your life better in this world. And the more we do the 613, the more we focus on Judaism, the better your life will be, which I'll explain with a whole bunch of statistics and stuff in a second. And the less we do it, the quality of life goes down. I'm here to contend, and I'm happy to be challenged. Every single one of the 613 mitzvos is here to make your life better in this world. Yes, what's your name? Daniel. A lot of Daniels.
What about kashrut?
Great question. What about it? How do you explain it? You can't eat pig, right? How in the world? That's so insane and restrictive and crazy. So before I answer your question, can you agree to me that 612 you understand? Or 600 or whatever. So you don't agree. Meaning you're going through the list. Okay. So would you agree that what we put into our bodies affects our potentially physical, emotional, mental health, potentially spiritual health? I'm not even going to get into spiritual health. I want to leave that all out because we don't have that point of reference. Ditch spiritual health for a second. Physical health. There are 4 Jewish philosophers that have different ways of understanding how kashrut, how not eating pig, could possibly be a problem. Number 1. Physically unhealthy. So you're going to say, well, what do you mean? We have to look at the non-Jews. They eat pig, and they don't seem to be harmed. Well, first of all, this philosopher, his name is Zev Barbanel, he'll tell you, how do you know? Maybe non-Jews, if they wouldn't have eaten pig, would have lived 5 years longer. You don't know. So you're going to say, well, what do you mean? Jews who ate pig seem to be living just as long as non-Jews or Jews that don't eat pig. How do we know? We don't know. We don't know anything. That's number 1. Number 2, that's one, I'm just giving you food for thought. One philosopher, the Rambam, says, no, nothing to do with physical health. It has to do with emotional sort of character development. For example, a pig is a lazy sort of, often referred to as a dirty animal. Even though it's clean, but it's lazy and dirty. So how do you know when you eat food, it goes into your bloodstream, right? The food is broken down into molecules and chemicals, and then it is absorbed by the body. It goes into it channels and fuels the blood. How do we know what happens to the character traits that are embedded in the DNA of flesh of animals? How do we know what happens when they get absorbed into the body of a human? Do they have an effect? Do they not? I don't know. The Torah says that they do, according to the Rambam, according to the greatest Jewish philosopher of all time, Maimonides. And he says, the Torah is cautioning us by saying, the Torah, God, wants to have the Jewish people the most harmonious, the most peaceful, the most merciful, the least cruel people on earth, which, by the way, they are. How do we get to that? One of the ways is watch what you eat. Don't eat carnivore. Don't eat lazy animals. Because embedded in their DNA have some of the character traits of those animals, which could be absorbed in the body and may or may not affect the body. You see what I'm saying? My point is that suddenly it went from being this crazy, ancient, ridiculous thing to, okay, I can hear that. I may not know, like I have to run through by the science, but like, okay, that's Judaism's position. Great. So suddenly, when I don't eat a hamburger, I'm not just doing it because I'm following some ancient, outdated, dinosauric religion. Okay, so this, I can hear why that makes sense. See what I'm saying? Yeah, you got, what's your name?
Zach.
Zach.
So what about like when you eat chicken or, so why can't you like non-kosher chicken or beef or something like that? Because that's like, you can eat kosher.
Good question. Okay, well, you have a cow, which was shot, which is primarily the way that non-Jews, which they don't slaughter it. They have a stun gun, which shoots a little pellet into the brain of a cow, which I could give you my book afterwards. I have a whole chapter about explaining how the ritual slaughter has been banned in many countries. I don't know what's going on in Australia, but in Europe it's banned. In many places they try to ban it. Why? because it's cruel and inhumane to animals, okay? So instead, they stun gun the pig or the cow. Right? They shoot a little dart into the brain, okay? Researchers have recently discovered that slaughtering the exact location that the Torah says to slaughter, which is a certain vein in the neck, actually is 1.2 seconds less of nerve-ending pain than the stun gun. Amazing. So my point is that the Torah is very, very careful that we don't become torturous, barbaric people. Because, as history is very clear, it's very easy for people to, on a dime, become horrible, barbaric, torturous people. Case in point, virtually any point in history. So the Torah says, no, I'm going to allow you to eat meat, but you have to do it in the least painful way possible to the animal, so you don't, cause pain to the animal. You see what I'm saying? So suddenly it goes from like, what the heck? What are we doing here? Like, what's wrong with like an animal that I just stabbed in the stomach? The Torah says, no. Not only is that cruel, you're not allowed to eat it if you do it that way. It has to be done in the most humane possible. You see what I'm saying? It changes the perspective. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to get to it in a second.
Just following up on that. When you said there's about 1.2 seconds between like the time of death in terms of life, yes. What happens when technology catches up? Because the way the world's going, maybe 50 years ago there would have been a 10-second difference, 5-second difference. What happens when there's a 0-second difference, or even
first of all, technology hasn't yet to catch up. Second of all, it's not such a technological thing. It's really the physical makeup of cows, that their brain, when they have a bullet in the brain of a cow, it doesn't end the life of the cow nearly as fast as when you cut off the trachea, the airways. So it's not like technology can change that. You see what I'm saying?
I think it's kind of the way technology goes. Like, I personally don't know. No one knows what's going to happen. But I think in 50 years' time, there'd be a much quicker way to put it.
Okay.
And if that does happen, like you said, should be the quickest.
If it does happen, the Torah will change. Guess what? It's never happened. And we are deeply, firmly in belief that the Torah will never change, because the Torah is written by God, and God knows technology. And He knows.
Hypothetically, if it does happen, the rule will change.
It will never change, because rules don't change, but it's never happened. That's my point. Meaning, like, we read these verses in the Torah as being applicable forever and ever and ever. You know what I mean? So we're confident that it will never change. You know what I mean? So in 50 years, when that happens, we could have that discussion. But yes.
So in the sense of kashrut, like a kosher animal, like a cow, for example.
Right.
Like that's like born with like a blemish, like a deformity, right? So like the animal's becomes non-kosher, but in theory, you're eating. If that blemish doesn't affect the way the cow lives, like what's the difference? Like when you can chef it in the right way, it's all set, and then but like the animal's got like some sort of cut, so it makes the animal not kosher. Like why is that? Like that's like it becomes not kosher. Why does it become not kosher?
So you're referring to when an animal is slaughtered properly, but there's something wrong with its lung.
Oh yeah.
So there's multiple different approaches. One of them is that it's the mercy aspect. We don't want people to eat animals that like are sickly, for the sake of us having mercy on animals that are now. It's like sort of retroactive mercy, because we only discovered that it was sickly after it was already killed. You know what I mean? But the main reason is because if an animal is sickly, we're afraid about our health, and we're afraid that it has other issues with it that we don't know about. So the second an animal has an issue with its health, finished. We are more careful about our health than lots of people. The reason why 50% of the doctors in Europe have been Jewish up until 1933 was because we are obsessed with health. We are obsessed with maintaining our health. The reason for that is not so much that we're into our bodies. We don't idolize our bodies like the Greeks do, but precisely because our bodies contain a soul, which we're going to get to hopefully in a second. And we are so obsessed with maintaining our soul that the only way to have a soul is to have a body, right? So you have to be into health. Jewish people have been always very into health for centuries. So if you slaughter a cow and you find that there's some sort of sickness, we're afraid of consuming that meat for fear that there's some other sickness we don't know about. You know what I mean? The point that I'm trying to make, and we could talk about kashrus for a long time, maybe we'll leave that to the end. My point that I'm trying to make is, instead, your perspective and your approach to Torah shouldn't be, okay, here's a bunch of rules that I don't know about. It doesn't make any sense to me. So therefore, the heck with it. I'm going to go to Western societies. America's got it. Or they, like Melbourne or Australia, they just figured it out. They nailed it. And then when you start researching and asking like 30 seconds worth of questions about Shabbos, so restrictive. I can't do any work on Shabbos. I can't use my phone for an entire day. And then you're like, wait, like every single psychology textbook will tell you it's probably good to take a day out of your week to like slow down and to like spend time with your family and to like take a shower and to have decent clothing and food on and spend time with your family, right? The immense psychological health that will bring you help, it's like suddenly Shabbos is a no-brainer. We could talk about, girls and relations with girls and premarital sex. We could talk all about that. My point that I'm trying to make with you is, I think it's pretty clear, the Torah is not your enemy. It's not roadblocks trying to get in the way of your life. It's there to benefit you. God doesn't need us to serve him at all. It is here because we initially were the people who chose to be the flag bearers of morality for God and to sort of spread the light. He rewarded us with, hey, this is an epic textbook. Read it and follow it. It will lead you to an amazing life. Yeah, okay, we're going to take a couple more. Yeah, one more second. I'm going to get to you in a second.
Do you take showers?
I do not, but Sephardim do.
Okay. So, what's the difference? Like, why isn't it?
It's like a very technical about squeezing, or there's a squeezing hair issues. You're going to squeeze a towel. Yeah.
The water's already preheated.
So yeah, there it's like a nuanced halachic technical issue, but. There are loopholes. I could find you a rabbi that will get you. If you really need.
Isn't a loophole? Isn't that thing about like follow loopholes, right? Like it shouldn't be good in the first place.
No, it depends. It all depends. It all depends on the scenario, and all depends. Okay, we're gonna take one more question, then two more questions, and then I want to move on. Because we have a lot to get to, and I think there's a larger point. Yeah, what's your name? Saul. Okay.
You mentioned before that like Judaism, like we don't really adapt. We have to say all these years. But like in our ever-changing world, where like you've got all these like technological advancements, couldn't that be potentially dangerous if you're not really like, you've got all these things that are changing and then you're staying the same? Could that be dangerous?
So there's definitely a balance that has to be taken. Meaning, we're not, the Amish. You familiar with the Amish people? Yeah. So the Amish people don't use technology. Period. Zero. Electricity. Zero. Right? I'm a big fan of technology. I got phones, I got laptops, I go on airplanes, I go on cruises, I travel the world. Like, I'm very much high tech. I'm all into that. But that's not contradictory to me realizing that, okay, the world every 100 years comes up with some new way of living life. Lots of them have led to failure. I'm going to stick with the one that's been stamped by God. You know what I mean? So that's not a contradiction. You could do both.
But like, what happens if, I don't know, for example, in 100 years they've figured out a way where you can like watch TV on Shabbat? Like, would that be, as in like this, without any loopholes or anything, like you just,
So that's a good question. So there's like a separate discussion in regards to rabbinic safeguards. The rabbis, which whatever you want to refer to as rabbis, but the rabbis are given the liberty to make new rules which maintain the safeguard the sanctity of the old rules. Meaning to say, I'll give you an example. It's really, really bad. It's a major issue, sin, to just have sexual relations with a random woman. Big sin. It's not a biblical sin to be in a closed office room with a woman. It's not biblically prohibited. But the rabbis came along and said, okay, wait a minute, folks. We got problems here. You know what I mean? The statistics of numbers of married men who are having issues with secretaries is mind-bogglingly high, okay? So we decided to create a rabbinic prohibition that you cannot be in a room with a woman with a closed door. So that, if you don't know the ins and outs of Judaism, that's like so dinosauric and so archaic and so restrictive and so ridiculous. And then you're like, wait, let's talk about it for 3 seconds. This is a married man, right? He has a loving wife. He has kids. He has a happy marriage. So for 30 seconds of pleasure, it's going to destroy his whole life. We're like, we might as well just have a safeguard rule. You cannot be in a house. You cannot be in an office with a closed door. You see what I'm saying? It's a no-brainer. But the Jews get attacked, and the Jews get vilified.
So it does adapt in a way.
Absolutely adapts. Not only does it adapt, I would say it's ahead of the time. I would say it's way ahead of the time. I'll give you an example. Internet came out, in the late 90s, early 2000s, okay? What happened within the Jewish community in this very city? You know what they did? they created this massive company, nonprofit organization called TAG, TAG. It's a internet filter company, okay, which was copied and mimicked around the world. Why? Because they realized, okay, this is going to be a problem. Let's get ahead of the times, right? So suddenly, Jewish people are all using internet, or at least religious Jews, but it's filtered. So that saves you a boatload of issues. I won't get into details, but Google, the second most visited website in the world, because number one is Google, but that doesn't count because it's not a website, right? So the number two starts with whatever. You can do your math, folks. My point is that that's stupid. It kills marriages. It kills your health. It kills your family. What the heck? So I'm just, it's 2 or 3. Google it. It changes, but. Okay, let's get to, one more question. I'm sorry. One more guy.
With regards to laws about like slavery and stuff, there's lots of laws about slavery. Like,
Yeah.
some we might even consider positive nowadays, like you have to give your bed to the slave, that there's only one and all that.
Right.
And obviously nowadays we don't necessarily violate those laws because like slavery isn't practiced, but there's lots of laws on it, and there's also laws on other stuff that we don't violate. We also don't practice in that sort of area. Like, does the existence of these laws, like around a temple, it's not really our fault because there's no temple. But
Right.
do these kinds of laws imply that we should be doing these kinds of things in our society? And the fact that
Like having slaves?
and other stuff that laws are about.
Okay, that's a good question. So there are many laws which they don't mean you should go and do them. For example, there is a law that if you're getting divorced, you have to do it through the Jewish way and give a get and whatever. That doesn't mean go get divorced. That means if you need to get divorced, this is the Torah way to do it. So there are many laws like that. So slavery, I think, is one of them, where it's not saying go and get slaves. It's saying if you have slaves, because we were living 3,000 years ago, which everyone in the world had slaves, this is the way to treat them. See what I'm saying? Okay, yeah, one more question.
Sorry, just on that, why wouldn't it just outright say, like, no slaves? Like, if we're trying to be the most moral, ethical religion in the world, and, like, even though it's common and popular to have slaves, it's common and popular in idols as well, in idol worship, why can't the Torah just be like, no slaves? Why don't you have to,
So,
like, you know, slaves, but we don't.
Right. Okay, good question. When we conjure images of slavery, whatever image you're thinking of slavery was not what the Torah was talking about at all. There was no people chained to walls and whipped and blacks being taken by some rich white guy from some village in Africa in a crate and then schlepped over on a boat to Africa, to Australia, to New Hampshire, and then whipped. None of that. Slavery, according to Jewish, it's like you have a servant who is yours, but he gets fed first. If there's 2 beds and one's nicer, it goes to the slave. If there's one medication and you need it or your slave needs it, your slave gets it. Meaning, like, these people were first-class citizens to a certain extent. Now, there were laws, right, that you own his children and he can't run off with his children. But it's in stark contrast with what you would consider slavery, like the Romans or Greeks had gladiators with slaves who were, completely abused and, it was horrible. You can't kill a slave. You can't torture a slave. It has to be well-fed. But is there a concept of conquering another land and taking slaves as servants? Yeah. I don't know exactly why that's like completely horrible and immoral any more than taking the spoils of that place. Meaning, like, I don't see it as and being that the world has moved on from slavery, the Jewish people also moved on to slavery because being that the world looks at it as morally wrong. So we of course will never do anything that the world considers morally wrong. We'll for sure, even if in the eyes of the non-Jews it looks like it's morally wrong, so we won't do it anymore. See what I'm saying?
I understand some of your problems, but like, I still feel that, I mean, we can agree that the fact that the idea that they own the slaves' children, they can't leave with their children, like, that doesn't feel morally right to me.
I agree. I agree.
And, as you said yourself, the world decided that it wasn't moral. The world decided it was Torah instead of God. That seems like a bit of a contradiction.
Right. There are things that the world could think many things that are totally immoral.
But if you're saying you're aligned with the idea that Torah is the most moral source of morality,
right,
then we should stand by the idea that we should be allowed to have slaves and whatever term you put it, right?
So no, that's what I'm saying. Like there are what I was mentioning to your friend up there. What's your name? Jamie. Sometimes there are laws which are not saying this is like go ahead and do this. It's saying being that this is the reality. So, like the reality of the way human beings are functioning at that time. So we're going to give you the best way to deal with that reality at that time, as opposed to just widespread banning something. Perhaps the Torah realized that if banning it, it would lead to more immorality than by not banning it. For example, if slaves were banned in a time when everyone had slaves, so that would potentially lead to widespread abuse of the slaves. So instead, the Torah did the more merciful thing and said, okay, slaves are allowed, but it had to be done in the most peaceful, honor-filled way, which is they get fed first, they are given a good life, they get freed after a couple of years, mandatory freedom after a couple of years, meaning in that perspective, it changes it from being what the slavery of the blacks were. You know what I mean? But I see what you're saying.
I don't understand that it was a better slave. I just think it's weird that it just didn't outright ban slaves. Like it was okay with
I agree. It needs more research. But the perspective, I'm going to move on from this, but we can circle back to it if we want. The perspective that I want you to absorb is the knee-jerk reaction when you're coming to traditional religious Judaism is, instead of this is backwards, this is archaic, this is dinosauric, this is outdated, perhaps there's God who knew better, and it's brilliant, and it's leading to the most peaceful society on earth. Do you know which city in America has the most violent crimes? A city with at least 100,000 people. With the most. One second. I want to qualify my statement. Per capita, the city that has the most crimes with at least 100,000 people is, believe it or not, a city called Mobile, Alabama. And the reason for that, and it's not like Chicago or Baltimore, the reason for that is because Chicago has a lot of crime, but there's also like millions of people that don't commit crime. So it watered down the number. Do you know the city in America, according to the FBI, you can look it up, the FBI, at least in 2002 to 2023, 2022 to 2023, the statistics of 2024 have not been in yet. According to the FBI, the city with at least 100,000 people, which has the least violent crimes in the entire United States is Lakewood, New Jersey. The city with the largest number of religious Jews. Is that a coincidence? Of course it's not a coincidence.
It's kind of like, it's just like a gay party.
A gay? Very much not a gay. I mean, I don't know what a gay. I live in this community. I travel the world. I explore. I teach in Princeton University.
If you argue this community is gay, it's like just all Jews. Like it's almost like you're only going in because like you're not just coming to this city for no reason. You know what I mean?
What's wrong? I mean, I don't know what you mean by gated community, but
it's just like it's not like there's not a physical gate around it, but like it's just like there's the Shivas here, and there's Jews here, and there's Jews here, and that's it. Like it's like.
Well, you're gonna see that there's some of the best restaurants in the state of New Jersey, some of the biggest companies. So it's very much interactive with the rest of the world, but.
I drove by the driver was like, oh, that business is Jewish,
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next point. We're going to have questions. I just don't want to run out of time. The takeaway of this point is very simple. The Torah is not here to get in the way of your life. The Torah is here to enhance your life. God does not need to get in the way of your life. He doesn't gain anything by doing so. He's here to enhance your life. If we ever don't think that that's taking place by a certain particular mitzvah, it's probably our misunderstanding of that mitzvah as opposed to God being like totally out of it and out of touch. And you just look at the statistics, the lack of violent crime, the divorce rate down by 48%, the overall happiness, which we'll get to in a second. But I want to add another point. Here's, I think, a far more important point, which we want to get to. Let's ask the arguably history's most pressing question. A question that has baffled historians and sociologists and psychologists and theologists for many, many centuries. And that is, why do people hate the Jewish people so much? What is the explanation for anti-Semitism? What do Jewish people hate the Jews so much? Non-Jews see in Jews that bother them. What is the explanation for the Jewish people's unique capability of pissing off every person we go to, every place we've ever been? I was recently in a JCC. You familiar with a JCC? JCC is a Jewish community center. They have them in America. I'm playing basketball. I'm totally minding my own business. I'm on my side of the court. 5 non-Jews are on the other side of the court. I'm playing. After 5 minutes, one of them screams out some totally anti-Semitic slur, so I just ignored it. And then again, 5 minutes later, another like, "Yo, Jew boy, get out of here!" So I just ignored him again. Like, what the heck? This is the Jewish community center, right? I'm as welcome here as you are, if not more so. So then eventually, this guy just comes up to me and says, "Jew boy, you get out of here before I make you get out of here." So I just left. But I'm thinking to myself, as I'm leaving, what do non-Jews see in Jews? If I could just ask for your attention just for a couple more minutes. What do the Egyptians see in the Jews that the Jews didn't even see themselves? What do the Cossacks and the Inquisitioners and the Syrians and the Greeks and the Romans and the Bolsheviks and the Nazis and random idiots in Melbourne who are throwing bombs into synagogues? What do they see in the Jewish people that we potentially don't even see in ourselves? What do they see in us? We don't bother anybody. So, one second. Anti-Semitism is unique in 4 ways. I'm going to get to your questions in a second. Anti-Semitism is unique in 4 ways. It's unique in its universality. It's unique in its longevity. It's unique in its irrationality. And it's unique in its intensity. It's unique in its universality. Anywhere you go in the world, they hate the Jews. I was a few weeks ago in Japan, anti-Semitism all over the place. Argentina, anti-Semitism. Canada, anywhere you go, there's anti-Semitism. Nowhere else in the world do you find a hatred that is as universal. You know, there's another group that's super hated. They're the Kurds. You know that? The Kurds are hated by a lot of people on the earth. You go to northern Canada, nobody hates the Kurds. It's a regional conflict. Nobody in northern Japan hates the Kurds. They have nothing to do with the Kurds. I was in Japan. There's like 2 or 3 weeks ago. There's no Jews in Japan. Why do they hate the Jews? You have nothing to do with them. It's unique in its longevity. When was the first time the Jewish people were hated? Like the first second we were born, right? In Egypt. When was the last time the Jewish people were hated? Today. Right now. There's some Jew who's getting stabbed in Israel at some bus stop. It's unique in its irrationality. Every single reason under the sun have been given to explain anti-Semitism. We control society. We don't commit ourselves to society enough. We own capitalism. We own Marxism. We own communism. We own socialism. How is that even possible? I don't even know. We are too rich. We are too poor. We are leeches that suck money out of society, or we pump money into society. We own the media. We shy away from the media. We don't assimilate into society. We own society. And every single reason you could give for anti-Semitism, I could find you a 300-year period in Jewish history where that reason cannot apply, and yet anti-Semitism existed. It's totally intellectually inconsistent. What is it that non-Jews see in Jews that bother them so much? That's my question. So I want to offer you an answer with a story. So I used to do kiruv. I used to teach Judaism and inspire Jews in a low-level state university in America. Very low level. The entry in to this college was like, do you have a face? If you have a head, you can come into this college. So kiruv was a dream at such a place. Why? Because the kids, for the most part, were coming from dysfunctional homes, and there's drugs, and there's bizarre relations with girls, and they're drunk, and there's partying. So all I had to do was put up a sign and saying, like, there's going to be sushi, and then we're going to talk about Jewish values, and I have 150 people show up. Why? Because it's sort of, Judaism sells itself. It's like the no-brainer alternative to a life that's just bizarre and crazy. But then I switched to teaching in Princeton University. I don't know how much you guys know about Princeton University, but Princeton University is one of the best universities in the world. The single most elite people, certainly in America, but from all over the world, the top 1% of the top 1%. And I had a really hard time. Why? Because you have people there that are completely disciplined. They don't go anywhere near drugs. They are studying from 6 a.m. to 11 at night. They are, for the most part, coming from wealthy upper-class homes where their parents are not divorced. Their father's the CEO of Delta Airlines. Their mother has a law firm. I'm sitting there waving my little toy lulav and esrog, trying to get their attention. In the meantime, they're trying to become a senator. They have aspirations of becoming some CEO of some mega giant corporation. I had people in my class who were getting calls from Fortune 500 companies, billion-dollar companies, for them to become executives in this company. These guys are freshmen in college. To become executives. They're not listening to me. So I knew I had to come in with I had to totally redesign my classes. I had to come up with something that will rattle them, that will shake them to the core. I had to basically come up with material that's telling them, true, you guys are rich, you guys are smart, you guys are protected, but are you happy? Are you chasing the real definition of happiness? And I want to share with you what I told them. Okay? I want to share with you what I told them. I told them the following. I said, suicide is up 37% since the year 2000. 37%. So I wanted to ask 4 questions in regards to the statistics of suicide. Question number 1, I asked them, which age group do you think commits suicide the most? That's what I asked. So immediately they said, okay, for sure. What do you mean? For sure, teenagers or people in their low 20s, people who are stressed, and they got hormones, and they got bizarre girlfriends, and they have, financial stress, and they don't know which direction they're going in life. That's probably the group who are committing suicide the most, right? I said totally wrong. According to the CDC, according to the Center for Disease Control, the group, in at least America, I think worldwide, that has the most suicide is 55 to 65-year-olds. So it seems strange. It seems so counterintuitive. Isn't that bizarre? Why would that be? And then I asked them another question. I said, which ethnicity or group of people would you say commit suicide the most? That's what I asked them. So right away they said, okay, it's for sure immigrants, people of color, janitors, lower level, people who are poor. I said totally wrong. Compared to 4,907 Hispanic suicides that took place last year, 1,379 Asian suicides, 3,692 African American suicides, upper class, wealthy white people had a staggering 36,681 suicides. So wealthier white people commit suicide close to 800% more common than people of color, immigrants. Isn't that so counterintuitive? Shouldn't the people with the easiest time in this country, at least, with the most money, commit suicide the least? And then I asked them another question. I said, okay, which states in America commit suicide the most? I'm like, okay, this for sure we got. This we got. It's for sure New York, New Jersey, California, big, busy, stressful states with Broadway and Wall Street and Rodeo Drive and Hollywood Boulevard. I don't know if you've been to these places, but very high pressurized, crazy places, right? You would think they commit suicide the most, right? I said, totally wrong. The states that commit suicide the most in America, number 1 is Wyoming with 32.3 suicides for every 100,000 people. Then came Montana, Alaska, New Mexico, South Dakota, and Colorado. How does it make any sense? It's so counterintuitive. What, these tiny, small states with nothing going on? Strange. Then lastly, I asked them the following. I said, okay, which month of the year do people commit suicide the most in? So they're like, okay, this for sure we got. It's got to be December. Because December in America is the coldest month. It's the winter. It's people cooped up inside in the middle of their semester. It's cold. It's depressing. There's no sunshine. It's cloudy. That's got to be the month, right? I said totally wrong. The month where people commit suicide the most is the month of August. Smack in the middle of at least the American summer. Isn't that so counterintuitive? Isn't that so bizarre? Shouldn't the month with the most sunshine and the most days off and the most vacation be the month with the least suicide? Those are my questions. So I turned to them and I said, the answer to this is very simple. When you were born, each and every body was born. Each and every person was born. They came through their mother's womb, the stomach, and they entered a world. 2 things came out. If I could ask you guys to just quiet down a little, I'm sorry. 2 things came out. The body and the soul. The body came out, looked around, and said, this is great. I get used to this. Barbecue going on. There's like an OBGYN who's got a serious, nice new car going on. Liquor store. I could get used to this. The soul, on the other hand, comes through the mother's womb and looks around and it's like, the heck is going on? I left that place for this? It's like walking into the top floor of the tallest building in Australia. What's the tallest? Where are you guys from? Melbourne? What's the tallest building? What is it? Okay, you walk into the top floor of that tower and you have a meeting with 100 executives. You have a meeting with 100 executives. And you walk in and they're 55 years old and they're all sitting on the floor, eating applesauce, playing with toy trucks. You'd be like, the heck is wrong with you guys? You guys don't have anything better to do with your lives, right? The soul is the same way. It comes through the mother's stomach, it looks around and be like, this is so ridiculous. So it begins to ache a little bit. It begins to be confused. It begins to thirst for something more meaningful. But that thirst gets suppressed by the busyness of life. That gets kicked down the road like a can. The soul is aching for something real, but it gets suppressed by life sort of getting in the way of life. Okay? I'm building up here. People who are young, who are busy, who are distracted, who are under financial stress, trying to just figure out how to survive. Immigrants who are trying to learn the language, who are trying to make ends meet. They don't have time, no mental space for the soul to start asking its questions. There's no real estate in the conscience of them to start asking, what's up with my soul? But when people retire, or there's a little bit of space in their brain, they're a little bit wealthier, they're not under that stress, or they're in the middle of August, the summertime, where life is a little bit slower, or they live in Montana or Alaska where there's nothing going on, they can suddenly ask themselves, why the heck do I wake up every morning? New York is too busy. California is way too busy to ask such questions. So the soul gets suppressed, okay? I turned to these guys in Princeton and I said, you guys are all wealthy, you guys are all rich, you guys are all chasing money and power and prestige. There are two chemicals in the human brain that are associated with happiness. One's called dopamine, the other one's called serotonin. Dopamine comes from things like ice cream and sexual relations and candy. Serotonin comes from things like graduating college and getting a job and having a kid and marrying off your kid. Too much dopamine leads to a mental illness called, anybody know? Psychosis. Really bad. My wife's a psychiatrist. Super bad. Too much dopamine. Alcohol causes a trigger in the brain which releases something called dopamine. Makes you feel really good for about 3 seconds. Too much of it leads to a real mental illness called psychosis. Super bad. Serotonin is long-term. It's a chemical released in the brain which has long-term effects. Too much of it leads to what? Happiness! That's what it leads to. It leads to happiness. So I turned to them all in Princeton and I said, okay, you guys are all chasing dopamine. Do you have a method in your life of attaining serotonin? Do you have a method in your life of stopping the ache in your soul, which will one day, sooner than later, come to fruition, come to the forefront, and say, I'm starving? I said, true. You have money and power and honor and prestige, but how is that going to help you when you're one of the 47 million people who quit their jobs? How is your money and your power and your prestige going to help you when you're one of the 27% of people who are diagnosed with clinical depression? How is your money and your power and your prestige going to help you when you're one of the 18% of people who are diagnosed with anxiety? How is your money and your power and your prestige going to help you when you're one of the 51% of people who get divorced and 61% of people who get divorced in their second marriage? How is your money and your power and your prestige going to help you if you're one of the 41% of men and 39% of women who will get cancer? How will that help you? How is your money and your power and your prestige going to help you if you're one of the 72% of all people who are unsatisfied with the amount of money they have, no matter how much money they actually have? I turned to them and I said, listen, you're all chasing dopamine. Do you want to live a life chasing dopamine your whole life? Or do you want to live a life chasing serotonin? And I let that sink in. I'm a firm believer. Before the internet came before Google, the internet was a mess. It was a jungle, right? Before Amazon came along, buying something on the internet was a jungle. It was a mess. Before the Torah came along, the world, in essence, was a mess. There was child sacrifice all over the place. People were bowing down to all sorts of bizarre things, even more bizarre than today. I don't know if you've been to India, but there's a whole lot of bizarre things. It's bizarre. You would admit. It's bizarre. What's going on? It was 1,000 times more bizarre before the Torah came along. The Torah sort of put an end to all that bizarreness, but whatever. The Jews haven't made it to India so much. It was bizarre. There were nations of the world who were desperately trying to find a way to stop the ache in their soul. They were bowing down to salamanders. They were killing their own firstborn sons and offering it to the moon. I was in Tulum, Mexico, not long ago, and I'm taking a tour of this pyramid, and I'm schmoozing with the tour guide, and I said, "Okay, what they do on the top of this pyramid?" And he said, like, without batting an eyelash, he's like, "Oh yeah." So basically, the Mayans, they worshipped the sun, and every firstborn child of every family had to be offered to the sun. So they would take that firstborn baby, and they would come. The priest would bring it up to the top, and they would take a magnifying glass and align it with the sun. It would roast the baby and kill it, and like as if it was nothing. Like it was nothing. I'm looking at him like, what? The Torah came along and gave the world an algorithm. No longer do you have to be rummaging around in the dark trying to figure out a way to lead a decent life, to stop the ache in your soul. The Torah came along and offered you a way to stop that ache, to live harmoniously, to live peacefully, to live morally, to spread light, to chase serotonin and not dopamine. So when Hitler and the Bolsheviks and the Nazis and the Cossacks and the Inquisitioners and the Greeks and the Romans and the Syrians look at a Jewish person, they don't just see a citizen of the world like every other citizen in the world who's trying desperately to somehow try to find a way to stop the ache in their soul. They see someone who's found a way to stop it. They see someone who's found a way to feed their soul. Nothing is a larger dagger into the soul of a non-Jewish person than seeing the sight of the soul of a Jew. The soul of a Jew is the crown jewel of humanity. It is something, it is a soul in its pristine state. It's a soul that is well-fed and nourished. It is not confused. And therefore, that bothered them a lot. And despite the fact that the Jews, for the most part, didn't bother anybody, they were killing us at lightning speed. I want to read you a quote from Adolf Hitler. Fascinating quote. This is in Robert Wistruth's book, Hitler's Apocalypse, page 122. Look it up. They refer to me as an uneducated barbarian, Hitler said. Yes, we're barbarians. We want to be barbarians. It's an honored title for us. Providence has ordained that I shall be the liberator of humanity. I am freeing man from the restraints of an intelligence that has taken charge, from the dirty and degrading self-mortifications of a false vision the Jews have invented called a conscience. Conscience is another word for soul. And morality and their demand of freedom of personal independence, which only few can bear. The 10 Commandments have lost their vitality, said Hitler. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish like circumcision. If only one country, for whatever reason, tolerates Jewish family in it, that family will forever become the germ center for fresh sedition. If even one little Jewish boy survives, even without any Jewish education, even with no synagogue and no Hebrew school, he will go on to spread this toxic conscience to the rest of the world. What was Hitler bothered by primarily? That we had souls which were well-fed and well-nourished, and he did not. If you were boiling it all down, I know there was, I'm way oversimplifying the entire World War II. Torah is a foolproof way of living life. It is guaranteeing you a life of harmony, the best marriages, the best, sweetest, most harmonious children. Listen to this quote from a reporter standing outside the Warsaw Ghetto walls. Everyone familiar with the Warsaw Ghetto? If you're not, you should look it up. But the Jews of Poland, the largest Jewish city in the world before the war, was Warsaw. Put that into perspective. Lakewood, which is by far the largest Jewish ultra-Orthodox city outside of Israel, has 100,000 Jews in it. closely. New York is more sporadic. I'm thinking one spot. Warsaw had 300,000. Insanely large. And they built a ghetto. They crammed all the Jews inside of it. Listen to the following quote from a non-Jewish Polish reporter / journalist who wrote this, and it came to light many years ago, and it's currently in the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum. I'm telling you, this is mind-boggling. I found a crack in the Warsaw ghetto wall the other day, and I stole a glance. I'd expect to see humans in their lowest state, riddled with hate, violence, and abuse. I was expecting to look out at the Poles, the Polish people, outside the ghetto walls, and I'd see light, while inside I'd see darkness. What I saw shook me to the core. I stole a glance, and I saw light. I saw love. I saw virtually zero domestic abuse. I saw virtually zero domestic violence. I saw children loving their parents. I saw families holding on for dear life. I saw homes filled with holiness and purity. I saw sanctity of their Shabbos and the joy of their Sukkot. I saw the purity of their Yom Kippur and the sheer happiness of their Purim. I saw people maintain their respect for human life in one of the most horrid places on the face of the earth. I walked away from the crack in the ghetto wall, back to the supposed brighter side of humanity, back to the streets of Warsaw, now rid of its Jews, back to the homes with not even half as much light as the Jews behind those walls, back to the domestic violence and abuse, back to the city where our utopian bliss has been promised to us by the Third Reich. I am not sure what utopian bliss and real happiness looks like. But the Jews, from even behind the ghetto wall, seem to be a whole lot closer to it than we are. Is that not unbelievable? I am not sure what utopian bliss and real happiness looks like, but the Jews, from even behind the ghetto wall, seem to be a whole lot closer to it than we are. If that doesn't summarize Judaism in a nutshell, I don't know what does. It is foolproof. It is error-proof. You want to know why we don't abandon our religion, our way of life, when some other way of life comes coming across that's better? Because nothing has come across that's better, ever. Jewish survival isn't inexplicable. We don't give up our life for any other way of life because there's no other way that's better. Do you know who the greatest composer of all time was? Anyone know? Who? Okay, that's probably number 2. Correct. Ludwig van Beethoven. According to every... Okay, God's a good one. Ludwig van Beethoven was, without question, the single greatest musical composer of all time, according to virtually every metric. His music is played at the most important events. It's been played in probably more concert halls than anyone else. And what's most impressive, in my opinion, about Beethoven, who was born in Vienna, is that Beethoven was deaf. Can you think about that for a second? Beethoven was deaf. He could not hear. Beethoven went in his 20s. You ever heard of this? You ever heard of this? It's the craziest thing ever. Beethoven, in Beethoven's early 20s, late teens, he was a regular composer who played at the local pub. He wasn't anything special. He began going deaf. He lost his hearing in his early 20s, and he became seriously depressed. He moved to the Austrian Alps. He lived in a little hut. He was suicidal. He almost committed suicide, but he didn't. And he got his life back together. And in his little cottage, he gave it another go. And from that music came not just his greatest music. The world's greatest music ever came from Beethoven when he was deaf. The standard music taught in music school is Beethoven's music A man who could not hear. How's it possible? The answer is that Beethoven, after he became deaf, no longer composed music with his ears. He composed music with his soul. He knew the insides and out of music so well, he was deaf to sort of the peanut gallery. He was deaf to the mediocre composers out there, to the mediocre musicians out there. He didn't hear what they were saying. He wasn't infiltrated by mediocrity. He looked deep inside himself and said, the heck with what everyone's doing. I don't know what they're doing. I can't hear. And he whipped out the single greatest compositions ever. The Jewish people are the greatest composers of spiritual music on earth. And you want to know why that is? Because we're deaf. Because we're not forever craning our neck and trying to look and see what new form of dopamine Hollywood invented now. You know that feeling when you watch like 10 hours of Mr. Beast and you're like, okay, I gotta get a life. You know that feeling? That's your soul saying, get a life. I love Mr. Beast. I'm just saying, you know that feeling. The Jewish people are the greatest spiritual composers of music on earth. You want to know why? Because we're deaf. Listen to this story. Margaret Thatcher. You familiar with Margaret Thatcher? Margaret Thatcher, also known as the Iron Lady, was the longest-serving prime minister in Britain in England's history. She had a weekly meeting with the Queen. Okay, she would go meet with the Queen. They would discuss various geopolitical politics and whatever. She one time walked into the Queen's office, and she froze. And she looks at the Queen, and she looks at herself, she looks at the Queen, she looks at herself, and she realizes she committed one of the most serious crimes out there. She was wearing the same dress as the Queen, which is a big no-no. So she sweats her way through the meeting, and she runs back to her office, and she quickly writes a letter apologizing, and she sends it to the Queen. A few days later, there's a knock on her door. The messenger of the Queen is here, has a letter. Margaret opens up the letter, and it reads the following. It says, Dear Miss Thatcher, there's no need to apologize. There's no need to feel sorry. Why? For the Queen doesn't notice what the simpletons are wearing. That's what the Queen said. The Queen doesn't notice what the simpletons are wearing. The Jewish people we are kings, we are queens, we are royalty. We aren't busy trying to figure out what the latest trend of dopamine is, because we have our eyes set on something far higher called serotonin, called feeding the soul. And it's the reason for anti-Semitism, it's the reason why we're still here, it's the reason for our longevity and immortality. I'm just going to finish and conclude with the following. We'll hopefully give 5 minutes for any additional questions. I'm going to finish with the following. I'm going to finish with a quote, a magic trick, and then a story, and then I'm out of here. I'll do all three. Okay, the New York Times, considered by many to be the most successful newspaper in the world, it went out on a pretty interesting research project in 2011, trying to figure out who are the happiest people around. Who are the world's happiest people? Which would be a really cool research project, because if you could figure out who the happiest people are and then make an article about it, you can help a lot of people, because you'll start following those people and maybe get happier, right? So they conducted a whole bunch of tests, and the following article, which can be found, you can Google it, March 6, 2011, Week in Review, Section 1, page 3, I quote you the New York Times. The New York Times called thousands of randomly selected adults each day and asked them about their emotional status, their work satisfaction, their eating habits, illnesses, stress levels, and other indicators of their quality of life. It's part of an effort to measure the components of quote-unquote the good life. The responses are plugged into a formula called the Gallup Healthways Well-Being Index. And the results show, ready for this? The single happiest people in the entire world are observant Jews. The New York Times. Of course, after they discovered that it was observant Jews, they buried this in like the Week in Review section, 45 pages into the, as opposed to the front page. This shocked the world. You know what didn't shock? Us! Yeah, of course, obviously. What do you think we're killing ourselves for? What do you think we're not giving up for? Yeah, obviously, it's the happiest way of life on earth. It doesn't shock us. Okay, here's a statistic. Here's a magic trick for you. There are 613 commandments in the Torah, correct? How many organs and sinews are there if you combine them all? 600 organs and sinews. You combine them. 613, pretty cool, right? That's not the magic trick. But that is pretty cool. Okay, according to Jewish tradition, the average lifespan of a man for the duration of history is 70 years. It's a verse in the Torah. It's called Yemei Shenesin B'hem Shivim Shana. Then the Gvuro Shmonim Shana. The typical average lifespan of a man is 70 years. Okay, according to King David, according to Jewish tradition. How many hours are there in a day? There are 24 hours in a day. How many hours are there, therefore, in 1 year? 8,760. Right? 24 times 365 is 8,760. How many hours are there in the lifespan of a man? If there's 24 hours in a day, and there's 365 days in a year, and there's 70 years of an average lifespan of a man, how many hours are there in the average lifespan of a man? You ready for this number? 613,000. Is that a coincidence? There are 613 commandments. There are 613 organs and sinews in the body. There are 613,000 hours in the average lifespan of a man. Why? Because the Torah is our everything. It's all-encompassing. It is our everything. It carries us when we are alive. It carries us through the darkness. It carries us through the good times and the bad. I'm going to get to your question. I just want to end with a story. I'm almost done. The following story. And then I'll wrap up and I'll let you go. So a few weeks ago, I mentioned I was in Japan. And I travel around the world. I was in Japan, and I was taking. Anyone been to Japan here? Oh, you've been. Awesome place, right? So I was traveling on the bullet train from the city of Tokyo to the city of Kyoto. The bullet train is one of the fastest trains in the entire world. Goes close to 400 miles per hour. No, miles per hour. What? Right. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys are right. Tokyo is the largest city in the world. That's 41 million people, I think. So it has a very efficient train system. So I'm traveling with my family, my wife, my 2 kids. One of them is a 3-month-old baby. And I'm traveling to Kyoto. And there's an old Japanese man who turns to me around 15 minutes before we get to the train station. And he said, he's like, Mr. Man, in a broken English, I would advise you to sort of get your stuff together because it doesn't stay at the station for very long. So I told him, okay, thank you very much. I'm thinking to myself, like, I got this. I was thinking, like, in America, trains go to the station, they stay there for 20 minutes, and people get 5 hamburgers and a soda, and they're sleeping. And okay, so in Japan, everything's quicker, so it's like 7 minutes, right? That's what I thought. But then 1 minute to the station, I realized that I made a big mistake. All these Japanese people are lining up. They got their little handbag. They're ready to jump. They're stretching to jump off the train. They're ready to go. I have like 12 shopping bags. I got 12 bags of Bamba everywhere. I have 3 strollers. I'm like, I am messed over. So anyway, I quickly try to get my stuff together. The train comes to a stop. People are jumping off the train like it's the last helicopter out of Vietnam. And I cannot find my son's shoe. I can't find my son's shoe anywhere. I lost the shoe. It must have flung to the back of the train. But if I don't get off this train, it's going to keep on going. And it's not like in America or maybe in Australia where, okay, the next stop is only like 20 minutes away and it's like 1 mile down the road, right? It's not such a big deal. In Japan, it's going 400 miles an hour. The next stop is in another country. You're messed over. You cannot miss a stop in Japan. So I just said, skip the shoe. Finished. So I get off the train without my son's shoe. My son is 3. I'm in the city of Kyoto. A lot of mountains, a lot of hiking. He needs a shoe. So I'm like, okay, now what do? I got to find a shoe store for my kid. This is not like Lakewood, New Jersey, or Borough Park, where there's like a kid's shoe store every 12 feet. This is Japan. They don't have kids, and they don't wear shoes. There's no shoe stores anywhere. So I'm asking, I'm looking, everyone's pointing a million. It takes 3 hours. I finally find a shoe store. I paid 1,000,000 yen, and I buy my kid a pair of shoes. And I'm thinking to myself, as I walk out of this shoe store, I'm thinking to myself, if I would have just listened to that old man and taken 2.5 minutes to get myself in order, I would have saved myself 4 hours and a boatload of money. Life is a fast-moving Japanese bullet train. Right now in Lakewood, you guys are pulling up to a station, briefly, where you guys could ask all the questions, where you guys could take a minute to not let life get in the way of life, to give mental real estate for the soul to ask, am I chasing dopamine in life or serotonin? Am I just chasing Western culture and it's all its glamour and glit? Or am I chasing the tried and tested way of life, which will lead me to a life of harmony and bliss? And you can hopefully come out of these 3 weeks that you're here, being able to turn to yourself and say, hey, maybe ancient Judaism survived not because it's intense, not because it's barbaric, not because it's crazy and dinosauric and we just are restrictive, but because it's the greatest form of life on earth, and I'm lucky to be a part of it. I hope you guys all take these 3 weeks and use them well and come back to Australia refreshed with a totally radically changed view on yourself and the soul that's inside of you. I thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, you can...